Hello viewers, welcome to today's lesson. In this lesson, we are going to take off from where we stopped in the previous lesson. Please, if you have not watched our tutorials on the previous lesson on how we created this sign up and login page, you can look at the description of these tutorials for details. Yeah, but meanwhile, if you have not signed up to our um to our channel, please just click the sign up button below to receive more contents and notifications on our contents, right? So what we're going to do in this class is to actually take off from the last lesson we worked on, which is building this sign up and login page, right? So at the moment when we enter our sign up and enter our password and click on login, there's no logic, nothing is happening because I've not built a logic that deals with our login, right? So we're going to take off from there so that when users enter a login detail and enter their password, they will be able to sign in, right? So what's going to happen is that as users enter their username or email and password, we should integrate to our backend API and then call the login API to authenticate the user. So the login API actually checks if the user is an authentic user and then returns for us a response based on the parameters, based on the input that was entered by the user, right? So first of all, let's use our postman to look at the endpoint, the login endpoint, test it. First of all, with our postman, and then come back to our program, to our React file program project, and then consume that API. All right. Okay, so we have the API, which is this. So the API is expecting a username and a password, right? So these are the request body, right? And this is the endpoint, and it's a post endpoint, right? So we have a user underscore email and then password. So if you click on this, if you post it, send it to you click on post or send, you can see the response. It tells us that this user status success message, and this is the user ID, right? It returns for us the user ID. It also tells us from the status if the user is actually an authenticated user or not. So and the status code return for us is 200, which is okay. Now, if I enter a wrong username or a wrong password, let me add something here. You will see that. So this is a wrong user detail. So the message is invalid username, email, or password. You return for us status as error, and then the status code is 401 unauthorized. So it's not unauthorized user. So we're going to take up this and go to our code, our React project, and consume this endpoint in order to help us complete this this login page, right? So I'll go back to my project. Okay. So currently my project is a login page that powers this login page, right? Okay, so currently my page of of we designed the input component, and then we also designed our button component, which we are calling, right? So so this function, we have a login function This login function returns the CSS or the UI for our login component, right? So that's the part of the page. That's this particular page that returns for those two text box, the username. Okay. So in our login component, which is this our login component, we have we have two text box. One is for the username, second is for the password. If I go back to our page, you're going to find out here, right? So we want to, as users enter their username and their password. We want to capture this text entered by the user, right? Entered by the user. Now, so we need an event to do that. And that event is what we call the onChange event. So whenever there is a change in the text input, unless like a delete or addition of a text, yes, we'll use the onChange event to capture what the user is actually entering. So let's go back to our code and actually work on that. Okay. So currently these are our login component. We are calling or we're using or importing a component called input form. We're importing a component called input form. So this input form is a component in our component folder. So we're going to actually capture the onChange event when the user actually add or deletes the text. We're going to go back to our onChange event. We're going to go back to the input form to capture that event, right? So let me go back to this is my input form. So I'll just locate where it is, which is in our components folder. So our components, and then we'll have input form, right? So this is the input form. So this is the HTML element that was used to create the input form. That's the input HTML element. Now, to actually capture what was entered by the user, that's the username or password, I'm going to use an onChange event, right? onChange. onChange. So this event, when they change an event, we want to call a method. So that method we want to call will actually reside in the parent component. So that method, so therefore, this input form component will expect a property, and that property will actually be a method. So we're going to call the property change, or we're going to call it change text, right? So clearly on the change on change of events, whether a text actually added or deleted, we're going to call that particular method. So change text is the handler. So on change event, we'll call this change text handler. So this function change handler is coming from our parent, come from our parent component. So in our parent component, we're going to define this function. We're going to write this function, right? Okay. So with that, let's go back to our parent component, right? Okay. So don't forget, the name of the event is what? Stream text. So let's copy it. I'll go back to my parent component, use the login, right? So let us start with the username. So you enter username here, right? So currently we are passing icon, type, and placeholder as a property to the child component, which is in our case input form. So the input form is also expecting a chain text. Now this chain text will be a function, right? This chain text will be a function, right? So this chain text should be a function. Okay. So I'll just do a simple. So this chain text is a function. I've written the function. I'll just do a simple console.log to test. Let's log chain text, right? So just to explain better, when there's a change in events from our child component, which is input form, right? We are calling in a method, a handler, which is chain text. And this handler, like you see in our child component, is a property from our parent component, right? So when there's a change of events, it will call this chain text handler. So this chain text handler, we're going to our parent component to define this chain text handler. So which is what the function, and the function is this function. Because we're passing the JavaScript, so you have to put in the curly braces, right? So this is then what is the function, this is the handler. And the handler is just simply do one thing, console.log chain text, right? Okay. So if I go back, let's see. So I'm going to inspect, let's check our logs. So, all right, let's be sure that's working. Okay, console.log. So if I'm entering the value, look at it, I see it. That's so once I'm entering the value, that particular handler is being called, and the content of that handler is just a console.log. Just logging the word change, right? So we are sure that this tells us that our handler is actually responding to the events. So let's go back to our handler and write proper thing. I write the proper logic, right? Okay. So what do you want to achieve? Like I said initially, we want to capture what the user is actually entering, right? Okay. So so this is for username. We're going to do the same thing for password. So I'll just copy this and go back, go to password and paste this. Now, so let's define each, right? So first, the first thing we need to do is to remember that when we capture what the user is entering, we want to seal it somewhere until the user is ready to click on the login, which is actually some login button, right? So when the user finish typing in all his username and their password, at every change of event, as the user is typing, we're capturing what the user is actually entering. We want to seal it somewhere so that by the time the user is done, when he clicks on login, we already have the username and password entered by the user, which we're going to use to call our endpoint. Right? So to do that, we're going to define a state. This state is we're going to use this state to actually store the information captured, entered by the user, right? So let's go back. So to do that, we're going to initialize the state, right? So I'll call it variable. Let's call the state values, right? So we're going to use what sets values. Okay, so use state. So we're initializing this value, right? So what are these? In our login, it's username and then password, right? So I'm going to define this. We're going to initialize this value to an object. This object is going to contain the username and then password, right? So I think email and password. I'm going to change that in our initially email will be empty. We also have password. Initially password will also be empty. Please, I'm going to change our login from username to email. Enter your email here, right? So the right word is email. Remember, it's email, not surname. So currently we've defined when you initialize a state. This state is an object with property email and password, right? We need to so all we need to do is to destructure this particular state, right? So how do I do that? I'm going to do this. We have email and then we have password. So what we are doing is just to destructure these as states. So values so that this value now, which is an object with property email and password, have been destructured, right? Okay, so meaning that this event on change to chain text, we want to update that state to actually the current input entered by the user, right? But before then, we also need to do one more thing. When the user is entering these inputs, we want to capture, we want to display exactly what the user is entering, right? And in HTML, we use the word value. The word value represents. So if I go to, okay, just to make you understand, let's go back to our component. And then if I use this word value, and I say value, for example, value is HTML. So if you do this, no matter what you enter in your text box, your value will be what? HTML. I see. So that means values is used to define the content of the text box, right? So what it means is that we want to also pass in what value that will be displayed in our text box, so that if we come to value, yeah, we're going to use what? Value. So what we are saying is that the value of the text box, the value in this our text box, which in this case we say HTML, the value in this our text box should come from the parent component, right? So that in our parent component, we're going to pass down what value we want to display, right? So that means in our parent component, we will also be passing this value. Now, in the case of login, this is our email. What we're going to pass in will be what's email. And don't forget, this email came from what? These states. So whatever is the value of this state is what will be passed in to the child component, which is input form, right? So that means initially our form will be empty. So that whenever we update the states, it also update the value in the text box, right? So for our password, we also pass a value of what? Password. What password? Right? So what we are saying is that for both email and password, the value should be the value of what? Of the state. Right? Okay. So now let's return back to our handler, our event handler. So whenever there's a change in text, whenever there's a change in event in our text box, we are calling this handler, which is a function. And what we simply want to do in this handler is just to change the value of the states to the value being registered by the user, right? So let's continue to do that. We have defined our change text, which is our event handler. So this event handler is actually a method, right? This event handler is a method. And now before we proceed to this, I need you to understand these three basic things, which I'm going to explain, right? So let's go to our notepad. So I need to explain three basics. Number one, when you use an event handler, an event object is passed as argument to the handler. So this event object contains information about the node that triggers the event. So when you use an event handler, an event object is passed to the handler's arguments. So this event object contains information about the node that triggers the event. Right? So another thing I want you to understand is what we call the dynamic object, right? So now, before now, in our JavaScript course, if I recall, for those of you that have known the JavaScript course, can go down to the JavaScript playlist and watch it. But to define an object, we use, for example, variable and the name of the object. I'm going to call it object name. And then an object contains key pair, which are properties and values. So if, for example, I have a property called name, and the value of that property, I'm going to name it John. Now, we have created an object. I'm going to call it object name. I've created an object called object name. This object name has a property called name and a value called John. So the value is what? John. Now, what if you want to assign this name dynamically? What if the property name, is not known to you? So in that case, you can use a dynamic method to assign property. Let's use what we call object literals. As an example, we have a variable, and I want to name this variable name. I want to name it, then I'll name it, for example, name. So I'll create an object again. Object n. Now, in this case, I'm not sure of the property name. I want to assign the value. I want to give the value assigned to the value of my name to be the property of this object. So I'll use what? Object what? Literals. So my name. Right? So in this case, whatever value that is assigned to the my name variable is what to be used as its property in the object n, and the object name object n, right? So this is a way of making dynamic what object, right? Okay. The third thing I want you to recall is that spread operators in JavaScript are used to copy an object to another object, right? So that's how you can use spread operator to copy an object, right, to another object. Let us go to our console and try what we are talking about, right? So I'll go to my console, my browser console, right? Okay. So the first thing we said, now the second one we said that if you have a variable, for example, my name, right? And my name, you are giving it what? Let's say name. Now you can create an object with property equal to the value assigned to the value of my name using object literals. So let me call this object what's name. Object test or whatever, right? So this object, rather than giving it a static value property, I want to assign property, any value given to this variable called my name to be the property, and I'll call it what? John. So if I check what is object tests, you can see it, right? So this is similar to writing a normal object as this. So what has this helped us do? So we have made the property of this object dynamic. So it is dependent on the value given to this variable called my name, right? So the third thing we say that spread operators in JavaScript are used to copy an object on the object. Supposing I want to create another object called copy object, right? Now I can copy the content of the object called object text to become the content of copy OB by just using what is spread operator, right? So if I say object test, right? So if we look at what we have in this, it will be exactly the same thing with object text. I see that. So you can use spread operator to copy an object on the object. I can also try, let's say, copied with extra, copied with what? Extra. So I can also copy these objects. I want to copy the content of copy P, right? In addition, I also want to add more. I can say, okay, class. Let's say P. So if we look at the content of copied extra, you can see it's now name and what? And class. What if I want to modify? What if I want to create an object from this copied with extra? But this time, I want to modify or primary class to C. You can do that. Copy and modify. Right? So what we'll do is that we are copying the content of copied with extra, right? But we also want to modify class. Instead of B, we want to make it what? Right? So let's look at what copied with modify will give us. Copy and modify as a C, right? So we're going to take this knowledge down to our current project, right? Okay, so let's do that. Now, this is our event handler, right? In this event handler, we have said that the event handler, an event object is passed as argument to the handler. And this event object contains information about the node that triggered the event, right? Okay. So what do we want to do in this event handler? Simple. We're just going to call a function. Here we're going to write the logic, right? So I'll call that function handle change. Now, the function will expect two parameters. One is the text that is actually entered by the user. For example, in that case, email and password. What email was entered by the user? How do we get that? Remember that our event object contains information about the node that triggered the event. So since the text box that triggered the event, we want to extract information, which is the text. Particular information we want to trigger is the text that was entered by the user. So we're going to use the events, which is the event object, then targets dot what value. Now, the second parameter I want to pass down to this handle change function is which states are we trying to update for this particular text box. And if I go down, you see that we created initialize two states, which is email and password. But for this text box, which is the email text box, which of the states property do you want to update? In my case, we want to update what? Email. So I'll pass it. Email. So we're going to go down to write the logic for this handle change. What's handle change just going to do? What we want handle change to just do is to update this. Is to update this is the states, the property of the state email to this particular value entered by the user. So let's go and work out the logic for this change. Handle change. Let's go. So I'm going to go down here, and then I'll declare a variable. Call it what? Handle change. So don't forget, we say handle change is expected two parameters. The first is the text entered, right? The partial text entered or input. I want to call it input instead. Input. Input. So the second parameter expected from this handle change is the state. Which particular state are we trying? Which property in the state are we trying to update? So targeted what? I'm going to call it targeted. Call it targeted property. The targeted state property. So simply, what do you want to do in this handle change? We want to update the state property send from the calling function, from the caller. Want to update it with the inputted text. Input entered with the input entered. So how do we update this state? Remember our state function, our state updater function, which is what? State value. So we'll copy it. No, we'll copy it. So remember we said when you are trying to update a state, and what you're going to update, the state you're going to update will depend on the previous state. You use what? A callback function, right? So this callback function, we're expecting in this callback function, so this is our callback function, right? So this callback function will be an argument will be passed to this callback function, right? And this argument is the previous what? State. So this our set value. Let me be sure I got the spelling correctly. Set values. Okay, is the state updater function that's used to update this our state, right? And because the new state will depend on the previous state, we'll actually need to pass in a callback function, right? Which is this function, right? And this callback function will expect an argument. I'm calling it previous, and that argument is the previous state. Now we want to create a new state. We want to create the new state, right? So we're going to return the new state. Don't forget our state is actually an object, right? Now that's our state. Now we want to copy the previous state down to this new state. Remember, we use what? Spread operator. So we are at this point, we have copied the new state, the previous state. But in line 18, we are constructing our new state. But our new states will depend on the previous states. So in this our new state in like 18, we want to first of all copy the previous state. And then after copying the previous state, we want to now update the property, email in our case, or whatever that was passed in as the targeted property with the text entered. So I'm going to use the dynamic object literals. So what do we want to update in this, our new states? What do we want to update? We have copied the content of previous states. That's fine. We also want to update the previous, we also want to update the new states, right? So, and what do we want to update? We want to update this particular property in that object. In this case, it's dynamic, which will depend on what is passed from the caller function, right? And they want to update it with what? With this first parameter, which is the text entered by the user. So now, to actually confirm what we have done, let us log console.log. Let us log our state, which is what? Values. And let's see what it will return. Values. What are we expecting? That as we type the email address, the state values, this state will update itself. We update this state to be updated. And how is this state updated? It will copy the content of previous value and update this particular property with this value in the state, right? So if we log this, we should be getting results of what the user actually entered. Right, so let's go back. I'm going to check our log first. Let's go to our console.log. So I'll delete this. So let's start entering. Because as I'm entering, the state is being what? Updated. Right? Okay. So I'll do the same thing to, so if I've gotten this, I'll do the same thing to our password, right? So I'm going to copy this. Right? Then for our password, on our event handler, I'm going to paste the same thing. But this time, the property we are trying to update in the state is what? Password. So with this, if I go back here and I clean this, let's start afresh. All right, so I'm going to, so log in. Let me clear. It says, oh, so let's go and check this. Let me be sure I'm actually, so we're calling handle change, right? Let me be sure I'm logging it in handle change. So handle change. Okay, I've removed the console. So let's log in console.log. We're logging values, right? So let's see. So let's go back here. I'm going to delete. So clear. Let's start. So Malachi, you can see. As we keep typing, it's updating the state. First of all, to copy the previous states, and then update with the new property. So the same thing if I'm entering password event. So now our state, we're now updating our state with what the user is actually typing. So what we need to do now is to go back and take this username and password entered by the user, use it to actually call our backend endpoint, which is the login endpoint. Now, before we do that, now to call our backend endpoint or to use an API in React, we will need a library. Now, JavaScript has a native library called Fetch for HTTP requests. However, I would recommend I use Axios. We have other libraries, but Axios seems to have worked. It has more community and has worked better. So the first thing we're going to do is to install Axios, right? Well, first of all, what is even Axios? What is Axios? Okay. So Axios is a popular library. It's a popular node library used to send asynchronous HTTP requests to a REST endpoint, right? So the library is very useful to perform CRUD operation as create, read, update, and delete. So Axios it's an HTTP client library that allows you to make requests to a given endpoint. So with the help of Axios, you can make requests to an endpoint. In our case, a login endpoint. Now, how do you use Axios? The first thing to do is to install Axios library by using the npm install Axios command, right? So the second step is to now import this Axios at the top of our page, right? Now, having done this, the Axios is now ready to be used. So now, depending on the HTTP verb or the endpoint you want to call, you now use Axios. Now, to use Axios for GET requests, all you do is to type Axios dot method. The method now is GET, so it's Axios dot GET, and then you're going to pass in as parameter the endpoint you want to make the GET request to, right? You can see the syntax right on the screen. Okay, so to also make a post request, use a similar option, which is Axios.post, which is the HTTP verb, and then pass in the endpoint as parameter. And also, in addition, you pass in the request body object you are trying to push to the endpoint. Now, when you make HTTP call using Axios, Axios returns a response object. Now, so when you send a request to the server, you receive a response object from the server with the following properties. So the response that comes back when you make HTTP calls to using Axios is an object. That object contains different property. The first is data. So you receive data from the server in payload form. Data is returned in JSON form and pass data into JavaScript object to you. So the data is actually the actual response that returns back from the server, and then is returned as a JSON form and passed back into JavaScript object to you, right? So what comes from the server is in a JSON, and then Axios will pass it as JavaScript object, and then you receive it as a JavaScript object. So on that response, on that property that is included in our response object is a status, and this status is a status code returned by the server, right? So on that response object, the third response property of the response object you get is a status text. So the status text is HTTP status message returned by the server. Now, another one is the header, which is all the headers that are sent by the server. We also have the config, or have the request, right? So let us jump into our project and then install Axios and use Axios to make HTTP call to our login endpoint. Okay, so I'm on my Postman. You can see that this is the endpoints for our login, and then HTTP verb or method is post, and then we're passing this object request body. Also, I click on send. I get a response back, right? So let's go back to our project. And now the first thing I want to do in this project is to install Axios, right? So I'm going to open a new terminal. So I'm going to open a new KitBash terminal. And the first thing we want to do is to install what? Axios, npm install, then we'll install what? Axios. So let's wait while installation is complete, right? Okay, so Axios is installed. Now, if I go to our package.json, to just confirm it, go to package.json. Under our dependencies, you'll find what? Axios. So this shows that Axios is installed in our project. So it's generally a good practice. It's generally a good practice to actually create a file separately for the API calls, right? So I will go to my source folder and create a new file. And what this file is doing is just for my API calls. So I'm going to call it API call what, right? Okay. So in these API calls, this file, that's where I'm going to write all my hit API calls. Now, don't forget to say to use Axios, the first thing you need to do is to import Axios, right? Axios library, which is from what? Axios. Now, the first API call we want to do is a login or sign in API call. So I'll create a function and call it sign in. So this function will be this function is called sign in function, right? So in addition, I'm going to be exporting this particular function, so we can actually use it in our login sign up page, right? Okay, so if we go back to our endpoint, you can see that the endpoints we're sending a request body of the email and password to the endpoint, right? To the endpoint, that's to the login endpoint. So what it means is that if I go back to our project, these are functions going to expect a username and a password, which is the data we're going to send to our endpoint, right? Now, if you also look at the endpoint, you see that the method is a post method, right? So as usual, the syntax. Now, don't forget that HTTP call, using Axios HTTP call, it returns a promise. Now, to handle this promise, we use what? Async what? We use await, right? And because we're going to because this function is going to be handling promise, we use async. And then we use a try catch block to catch any error. Catch error. Right? So this function is going to handle a promise. Also, we're going to handle that promise using async await. So the syntax is that the function, you have to pass in this async keyword. And then in the promise itself, you use an await keyword, right? Now, to use Axios, the syntax to use Axios for posts HTTP post call is Axios.what. The method is what? Creating web is post, right? So the first parameter we're going to pass in is the endpoint. So I'm going to copy the endpoint and then paste it here, right? Now, so just to recap, the syntax to actually make a post request to our endpoint is Axios, which is the keyword, the Axios. Then the HTTP verb in our case, which is post, and then this post the function, right? Now we're going to pass in the first parameter of the function, which is the endpoint, right? Now the second parameter is the request body, right? So in our case, this is our request body. We're going to copy this. Let's copy the request body and bring it here, right? So this is supposed to be an object. So that's correct. Now instead of this password, instead of this email we're entering, instead of this email, what we are going to send to the endpoint is the username, right? Okay, sorry, I'm going to change this parameter to email, right? To expect yes, email, so that it speaks exactly what we're expecting. So instead of the email address that we use in testing, I'm going to pass in this email, right? And instead of this password, instead of this particular password, I'm going to pass in the password, which is the password received, the password property received by this function, right? Okay. Okay. So now this Axios, this HTTP call is going to return a promise. And so to handle that promise, let's assign what is returned to a variable call response, right? Now, what is returned from Axios from the HTTP call will be a promise. To handle that promise, you use what await, right? You use await. Now, response, right? So, just to be sure of what we're getting back, let me log our response console.log. Let's see response, right? Okay, I'm going to log response dot. Remember that this response is an object, and this object is made up of different properties. We have talked about it. We said the data, the status test, the status, and the rest. But let's log the entire response and see. So I'm going to go back to my sign up login and import this particular function, and then we're going to use this function, consume this function, and pass in the email and password, right? Let's go to our login. So I'm going to import that particular sign-in function. Remember that it's a named import, right? So it's from a file. What that file is, what the file is API call, right? Let's check. I don't know why my suggesting. So the name is API call. API call. API call, right? So the sign-in function, API call. And I'm guessing what error am I getting? Password is not defined. API calls. Okay, password is not defined. Password. Let's go back to API call password. It's not okay. So we got this spelling wrongly. So I'm going to copy this. So this should fix it, right? Okay, so let's go back to our sign up. Okay. So if I return back to our login, when users come to this login page and click on this login button, you should call that sign in method and then passing the appropriate parameter to it, right? So that's what we're going to do. Now, this is the button I'm talking about. Come here. You can see this is the button. When you click on this button, it calls this action handler, right? This action handler. Okay, when you click on the button, this action handler, I call this action change action state, right? So initially, what this method was doing just to change the state from sign up to login, whatever. So which is this state, right? So when you click on the button, this particular handler is called. So now I want to take advantage of it. Use this handler to actually call our signing endpoint. So at what point do we actually call the signing endpoint? Two things. One, when this action state, this particular state, which determines what this action, right? This action is a state. And the state is either login or sign up. So when you're on the login component, the state is login, right? So it's only when we're on the login component that, so it's when this state is equal to what? Login. And, right? So if you look at it, we're going to call, when you click here, go to sign up, you click here, come to login. So we want to call that endpoint when you're in this login page. And then not just in the login page, you also click the login at the same time. You're already in the login page, and then you click the login button, right? So how do you get that? So when the action is equal to login, it means that you're in the login component. So to show, so also not just that you're in the login push component, but when you're in the login component, you also click the login button, and you can get the action using this. So it's when you click that login button, this new action is equals to login. So when these two things are true, that's what we call the login component, right? That's what we call the signing API, right? So how do we get that to see if what action, if this action equals to what login, and the new action, that's what the user, and that the user just click login button, equals to what login. If these two things are true, what we want to do is to call the login, right? So I'll just define a variable called login response, right? Equal to what? Sign in. Okay. So don't forget, this signing is a promise, right? So what I'm going to do to handle it, I'm going to use async as we said, right? And then await, right? So this signing method is expecting two properties, two parameters, the email and the password. And in our example, I've captured it here in this stage, which is email and what password. So we're going to pass in that email and password to this. So email and what password, right? So let's try this and see. If I go back here, we're now login, right? So let me copy this email here, which we use for testing, and then the password. Okay. Oh, this was supposed to be type password. I'm going to correct it, but for now, let's test and see. So if I click on this, let's see. Status. Okay, so this is the response. So this is the response back. Let's see the properties of this object. This is an object. So we have config, as we said, we have data, we have header, we have request, we have status, we have status text, right? So data, like we said, captures the actual response that was returned from this endpoint, right? So in our case, can see email, message, status, and then the user ID. Now, what if we enter a wrong email and password? Okay, we're going to look at that. But meanwhile, let's go back to our project, and then we can see that we have actually integrated to our endpoint properly. But let's go back to our API call. Since this is correct, so instead of just responding, let's return what we're going to return our response, and we're not going to return the result to return the actual data that was returned, data response data from the server. And remember the response is an object, and data property carries the actual response from the server. So I'm going to return what response.what data. Right? Okay. So let's look at error. Let me console.log what error. So if we enter a wrong username and password, when we enter a wrong username and password, what do you expect? What is error returning? What kind of object are we getting? So let's test and see. So this time I'm going to enter a wrong username. So in addition to 4, I'm going to add 6, right? I'll add 6. So click login. So we're expecting an error, right? So you can see it returns an error. So this object contains code, config, message, then request, return response. Now this response has data. So this response has data, which carries the actual message from the server, right? So what I'm going to do here is that if it's an error, let's go back. So for an error, let us return an object, right? This object will carry error of what? True. And then I want to capture the actual message from the server. You see it's error dot what response dot what data. Let's go back and see. Error dot response dot data, and data will have what? Message dot what message dot message. So the property, I'll give it message. So in simple terms, what we have done is that if there's an error, we return an object. The object has a property called true, and then if and then we also pass in the property message, which whose value is actually the message, the error message from the server, which is captured in an object of response, data, and what message, right? So if that is all, then what we can do now is to go back now and then handle this, right? So now when there's an error, we have actually gotten passing a variable, defining what is returned from the sign-in method to a variable called login response, right? So now, if We want to capture when there's an error, right? Okay. So we say if what? If login response dot error mean that there's an error. So when error is true, and there's an error from the sign-in method, when error is returned as true, what it means that there's an error. So what do we do? Display the error, display the error to the user, right? Now else. If action is this action, let's put an else for this change action. There's no point changing action when we're about to log in, right? So else this. Okay. So if login.error, if there's an error, we'll do this else, right? So what have we done? If the user is in login page, is in login component and clicks on login, let's perform this. Else, let's just change the state. So it's either the user clicks login, the user is not, it's a sign up page, click login, he wants to go to the login page. That's when you should do set action and then go to the login component. However, if the user is already in login and then clicks on login, there's no point changing the state. This user actually want to log in. So we handle that using conditional statement, using this condition, right? And then we created a sign-in method in our API calls to make API call to our server, to our endpoint, and then passing email address, the email and the password that is entered by the user to that endpoint. So it returns a response for us. And the way we constructed the response object from our API call is that when there's an error, error is true. The error property is true. So when there's an error, what do? We display the error to the user. We're going to write the logic to do that. When there's no error, what do? We're going to also look at that. So let's start with error. Now, to actually get this, what I'm going to do is to go to my property here. That's our property here. I will also define a new property in that object, and I'll call it error. Error will be empty initially, right? So when there's an error, what do? We have to update it, right? We have to update set what? We have to update that error property to the error value, to the error message returned from the server. So set values, right? Let's go back and check actual. So set values. So I also go to the structure error. And so let's set values. Set values. So set value. So let's go. So assuming there's an error, let's update the error property. So as usual, we're going to expect a callback. We're going to pass in a callback function, right? The fallback function will expect an argument called, if I give it any name, I'll call it previous. And this previous is the previous state. So that our new states will return our new state. So that our new state now will be the previous state, right? And then we'll update error to what? To remember login. I'm going to update error to login dot what message. Recall that the message is actually the value that was returned from the API call when there's an error, right? Now, so what we just did now is just to update our error property with the error from the API call, which is actually the error message from the server, right? From the sign-in method, which actually the error message from the server. Now I need to display to the user. So what do I do? I'll just go, what I want to do, I'll just go to our GSS, which is return here. Okay, so I'll do it before the last div here. All I will just do here is to tell empty div, create an empty div. All I'll do here is to create an empty div, right? And then the empty div, I'll pass in what? Our structured error. But if I go back here, log in, and I enter something wrong, for example, I believe this is wrong, and I say login, right? So, what could be wrong? So let us check it again. Was returning back unauthorized posts. Okay, let's go back and see let's go back and why this is happening. So I'll go back to the call here. Go back to our call here. So if there's an error, so what I'll just do is let's log this. Let's see what's coming back from what we're getting from our signing method. So I'll just log our words, log errors, but I'll call it login. Ls. So login response, right? So this is what we're getting. If I come back here, lose this, let's load. Okay, login. So we're getting error true, which is correct, which is actually correct. And so if error, login.error, which is also true, right? Login response dot error. So let us come back here and put this to log yes to be sure that you are getting this right. So I'll cause this unless so it's coming invalid username or password. So it's actually correct. So I want to cut this here. We're setting the value to login. Oh, so this was wrong. So it's actually login response.message, not login.message. So let's come back here. Login response.message. So this should be fine now. So let's come back here. And if I click on this, well, okay, so let's return back to our code. So what I want to do, let's log what we're getting as values. Values. Values, right? Which is values. Okay. So let's log error. Error. So that I come here and then let's click actually in values and so we actually set it to this to that value. So let's go back and our code for the let's go back to where we consume it here, right? So I'll put this. Let me put it here. Why this is invalid username or password? Let's see. This invalid username or password. I don't know why. I need to check this. Why I can see it here. Okay. Okay, so I want to put it after the bottom. Oh, that's wrong. So to the bottom container, sorry. I just added here. So we are good to go now. So when you come in, there is an emphasis. So I'm going to style this an inline styling. I'll give you the color of let's say red that. So RGB just F00. Okay, so if you look at, we have succeeded in capturing the error or whatever, and then displaying that error to the user, right? But one more thing before we actually look at the logic for correct username and password, right? So when the error still remains when the user is trying to change login app, I feel this not a good user experience. As soon as the user is trying to make any changes, this error should be cleared, right? That's one key scenario. Second case I'm actually looking at is when the user maybe move from login, for example, to sign up. This error should not remain, right? So two things. We want to clear this error when the user changes, when the user clicks on any of the button, for example, changes to a different button. We also want to clear this error message when the user makes changes in this input box, right? This input box. So how do you do that? Let's go back to our project. So there are two cases where we want to clear the error message. The first one is when the user makes changes to the text box. Remember, it's captured in the on the event that changes the state, right? Which is handled object. So when the user make a change, the first thing we want to do is to clear the error. So what we're going to do, we're going to use our set values. We're going to use our set values. So set values. So these set values passing a callback function, and then this callback function we're expecting an argument, which is the previous state. Why using this previous state? Because we still want to maintain, we still want to keep what the user enters username and password. We just want to clear the error, right? So as usual, what we are going to do is now we're now going to return a new state, which is a result of copying the previous state, and then we update what's the error in that state towards to empty. Probably username or password, right? Okay. So that's fine. So now, what if it's successful? What if it's successful? So let's handle that. What if a login is successful as a user, authentic user? So let's handle that. That's what we're going to handle in the else block, right? If user is successful, if login is successful, login is successful, what we're going to do, we're going to store the user ID in local word storage. So if the user is successful, if the login is successful, what we're going to do is just to store the user. So what I'm going to do is just to store the user ID in our local storage. So before then, let me log what we are getting back for successful. So I'm just going to log our response back, which is login.response, right? So I'm just going to log it. Let's turn back to here. So what I'm going to do now here is just for us to be sure of what we are getting back, the object we are getting back. So I'll just console.log, right? Okay, so we're going to test this. Before then, let's get the details of an authentic user. So I'll copy this and return back here. Paste it. Let's do the same thing for password. Okay, so console. And let me clear what we have. So let's log in. Let's see, login response. Okay, so this is what we've done as login response. And so I'm interested in this user underscore ID. This is what I want to store in the local storage, right? So what I'm simply going to do is that if the user login successful, I'm going to store local storage, right? Sorry, local storage. Dot what set what item. Storage dot set item. So it's a key value pair. The key, I'm going to give the key as user underscore ID, and then the value is login response dot user underscore ID, right? So if login is successful, what we are doing is just to store the user ID in our local storage, right? Okay, so let's try it and see. I'm going to turn back here. So let's go to my application. Our local storage, which is this, right? So let's try logging in and see. Okay. Alright. Let's. Okay, so user ID 4, right? So you see, when the user logs in and user is successful, we are saving the user ID in our local storage. So this brings us to the end of consuming our login endpoints, right? Right. So if I put in the wrong detail, I should expect a message from the server, right? Okay. So I'm going to take off from this and work on the sign up page, right? Now next lesson.